In the midst of the most severe blizzard in decades, a German Shepherd puppy, partially buried in snow, was found with only a faint heartbeat as evidence of its continued existence. The events that transpired over the subsequent 72 hours would challenge all principles of survival and cause an entire community to reconsider the boundaries of hope. The town of Timbavale was the sort of community that descended into an eerie quietude when snowfall loomed over its streets. Its inhabitants were well aware of the folly of underestimating winter's might. On this specific evening, the air possessed an unusual chill, not merely in its thermal reading but in a palpable sensation, the kind that permeates outerwear and settles in one's core like a premonition. Dense clouds amassed overhead, their hues of bruised gray and purple portending a storm no one wished to encounter. Winds commenced their whistling passage through narrow lanes and across rooftops like harbingers delivering unwelcome tidings prematurely. Ethan Claremont was seated behind the steering wheel of his aged pickup truck, his exhalations obscuring the windshield more rapidly than the defroster could manage. The vehicle's heater struggled, emitting only tepid air as he navigated past shuttered windows and darkened verandas. Timbavale was already entering a state of lockdown. As a volunteer at the local animal shelter and a part-time veterinary student, he had just completed caring for a group of abandoned kittens, and the images of their shivering forms lingered in his thoughts. Yet, something else vied for his attention, an indefinable pull. The radio emitted static before tuning into the local emergency broadcast, storm warning in effect until Monday morning. Wind chills expected to reach record lows. All non-essential travel is strongly discouraged. He reduced the volume, his gaze fixed on the horizon. Snow had already begun to fall, initially light, drifting like downy feathers, but within minutes it intensified, transforming into a white veil that rendered everything ahead a fading recollection. Then he observed it. Just beyond the illumination of his headlights, something darted across the road. It was too swift to discern clearly, but it was neither a deer nor a human. His stomach tightened. Most motorists would have continued, most would have dismissed it as a trick of the snow-laden light. But Ethan had learned to heed his intuition, and at this moment it clamored for him to stop. He pulled over slowly, the tires crunching into snow that was already accumulating. The wind pressed against the door as he stepped out, and for a fleeting second he was enveloped in silence, not the tranquil kind, but the heavy, unnatural sort that evokes a sense of being watched. He turned in a slow circle, squinting into the white haze. "Hello," he called out, his voice vanishing into the wind. "Nothing, just snowflakes dancing like phantoms." He took a few steps forward, his boots sinking deep. A shadow moved again, barely perceptible. It was small, low to the ground, then gone. A strange urgency gripped him. His hands trembled, not from cold, but from something deeper, something unexplainable. His gaze fell on the woods lining the edge of the road. That's where it had gone, he knew it. A dog? A fox? Something smaller? He should have gotten back in the truck, the storm was approaching faster now. But instead, Ethan turned toward the woods, his heart pounding, his footsteps swallowed by the storm. And from somewhere far off, so distant he almost imagined it, came a single, strangled cry, faint, fragile, but real. Ethan's boots crunched more deeply with each footfall as the snow intensified, swirling around his legs like cold, resolute fingers attempting to draw him backward. The cry he had perceived had vanished, absorbed by the wind, yet an internal compulsion prevented him from abandoning the search. There was no rational basis for it, merely a profound intuition that something required his presence out there. He pushed through a thicket of leafless trees, each limb coated in frost, resembling skeletal arms extending from the shadows. The cold bit into his cheeks, but he scarcely registered it. His attention narrowed to scanning every inch of the white expanse before him. Then he halted. Something disrupted the uniformity of the snow just ahead. An unusual mound, partially covered, unnaturally still. He blinked against the wind, his breath catching. It was not a rock. It was not debris. Ethan stumbled forward, dropping to his knees and brushing snow away with trembling hands. Beneath the ice-encrusted layer, tufts of fur appeared, matted, frozen, and clinging to life by a mere thread. His heart slammed in his chest as the full shape emerged. A puppy, a German Shepherd puppy. Her tiny body was twisted awkwardly, as if she tried to curl into herself before the cold overtook her. Frost clung to her eyelashes. Her nose was tinged blue. She wasn't moving. "Hey, hey!" Ethan whispered, his voice breaking. He pressed his fingers gently to her chest, searching, praying. Nothing. Then, faint. So faint he thought he imagined it. A flutter beneath his fingers. A heartbeat. Barely there, but there. The pup was alive. Barely. Panic and purpose collided inside him. He tore off his outer coat and wrapped her inside, holding her close to his chest as if his own body heat could reverse what nature had done. She didn't move. Her breathing was shallow, barely perceptible. Ethan's mind raced. He was too far from the shelter, and the storm was building into a wall of white rage. There was no time to return to town, no chance of rescue out here. A sudden memory slammed into him. His childhood dog, Marley, lost during a storm much like this one. They'd found her hours later, too late, curled beneath a porch with her eyes open but empty. The image had haunted Ethan for years, but this time it wasn't going to end that way. Not again. Clutching the puppy tighter, Ethan stood and turned, scanning the landscape. That's when he saw it. An old ranger outpost, barely visible through the snow, half buried, forgotten by time. It was their only shot. With numb fingers and shaking knees, he staggered forward, each step heavier than the last. Behind him, the snow covered the imprint where she had lain, as if trying to erase the miracle that had just happened. Ethan didn't look back. He couldn't. He had a life to save, and the clock had already started ticking. Ethan's arms quivered, not solely from the burden of the snow, but from the delicate existence pressed against his chest. The ranger outpost was little more than a shadowy silhouette in the tempest. Its roof bowed under decades of inattention, yet it represented refuge. Refuge signified warmth. Refuge signified an opportunity. He pushed onward, the wind shrieking like a cautionary cry, compelling him to steady each footfall. The entrance was frozen fast, unyielding from years of neglect. With a final surge of energy, he thrust his shoulder against it. It yielded with a groan, and he stumbled within. The chamber was colder than he had anticipated. Dust and cobwebs adhered to the corners, broken furniture lay strewn about, and the air carried the scent of decay and rust. But it was dry, no snow, no wind, and no time to spare. He knelt, placing the puppy, her fur saturated, her body nearly lifeless, on a section of worn floorboards. Her eyes remained closed, her breath faint and irregular. Ethan's own body was now trembling uncontrollably, drenched in perspiration and melted snow. He removed his remaining coat and enveloped her diminutive form, pressing her close once more, desperate to convey whatever warmth he retained. His hands moved instinctively, examining her paws. Ice crystals clung between the pads. He gently attempted to rub them, coaxing vitality back into her limbs, whispering, "Stay with me, girl. Just stay a little longer." She offered no response. For an instant, the silence in the room grew unbearable, so dense it felt as if it were crushing his lungs. He buried his face into her fur, disregarding the tears that streamed down his cheeks. He had to think quickly. He scanned the room. In the far corner, a small metal stove sat coated in dust and old ash. He hurried over, threw it open, and found just enough kindling and leftover wood to start a fire. His hands were too numb to manage a lighter. Instead, he fumbled for the emergency kit he always carried in his pack. Inside, a weatherproof matchbox. On the third strike, flame. The fire caught, tiny at first, but it grew. The room filled with the sharp scent of burning wood and melting frost. Ethan pulled Sasha closer to the warmth, tucking blankets he scavenged from a musty old cot around her. Her nose twitched just barely. "Come on," he whispered. "You've made it this far. Don't stop now." Minutes passed, then longer. The room was still too cold, but the fire gave hope. Every so often, Sasha would stir, a small twitch of her paw, a flutter of her eyelid. Ethan checked his watch. It had been 20 minutes since he found her. Every medical article he'd read, every story he'd heard, came flooding back. The next 72 hours were everything. If she made it through that, she had a chance. If not, he didn't let himself finish the thought. The storm outside showed no sign of easing. He tried his radio, nothing but static. He tried his phone, no bars. It was just him and her now, in a forgotten cabin no one even remembered was here. As the fire flickered across the walls, casting long shadows, Ethan held the puppy in silence, counting every slow breath like it was a borrowed miracle. And then, through the quiet, her eye opened, just one, for a second, enough to let him know she was still fighting. It was more than hope, it was a promise. 20 miles distant, in a ranger station situated at the periphery of Timbavale's wilderness, Camila Keller was examining emergency notifications when the storm reached its zenith. The windows groaned under the wind's pressure and the electricity flickered twice before the auxiliary generator engaged. Her phone vibrated once, then fell silent, Ethan's message appearing on the screen in disjointed pieces: found pup, hypothermic, sheltering at old post, coordinates. Then nothing, just a cold quietude more unsettling than static. She stared at the device, her instincts clamoring. The outpost he mentioned had been disused for years, no one ventured near it after a fallen tree had obstructed the closest road. But Ethan had gone nonetheless. Of course he had. He was the type of individual incapable of disregarding suffering. Camila had observed it previously when he had stayed awake for 2 consecutive nights tending to a litter of frostbitten kittens, nursing them back to health. And she also knew that if he stated a puppy required assistance, it was not a baseless alarm. Without pause, she donned her thermal attire, fastened her boots, and secured a first aid pack. Her snow goggles misted as she stepped outdoors. The storm was more severe than she had anticipated. Blinding flurries obscured the road, trees groaned under the weight of heavy snow, some already toppled across the path. The cold was not merely biting, it was punishing. Most individuals would have retreated, but Camila had her motivations. Years prior, she had lost her own dog, Benji, to a similar tempest. He had fled during a clap of thunder, and by the time she located him, he was too far gone. She never forgave herself for not acting swiftly enough. Tonight felt like a second opportunity, perhaps not to save Benji, but to prevent another from experiencing that same sorrow. As she trudged through the blizzard, she mentally reviewed the old ranger maps she had committed to memory. There were no landmarks to guide her now, only intuition and fragmented recollections. And then a flicker of light in the periphery of her vision. Initially, she thought it was a trick of her mind, but there it was again, faint, pulsing orange. She adjusted her goggles, narrowing her eyes. A fire out here? Her pulse quickened. It had to be Ethan. But as she pressed forward, snow rising past her knees, a sharp, creaking sound echoed through the trees, a noise that did not belong to the wind. Somewhere ahead, something groaned, wood, metal, or both. She paused, trying to pinpoint it. The storm was furious now, louder than ever, but her instincts tingled, something was amiss. The trees swayed more violently, snow falling in sudden bursts, and still, that flicker of firelight glowed like a whisper of hope. She tightened her grip on her lantern. Whispered, "Hold on, Ethan," and pushed into the dark, not knowing that she was now racing against a danger even greater than the cold. Something was shifting in the woods, something heavy, and it wasn't done falling yet. Inside the outpost, the fire had intensified, its flames licking the interior of the rusted stove with a consistent crackle. Ethan sat slumped beside it, his arms protectively encircling the puppy, forming a barrier against the elements. Sasha had remained motionless for some time, her body, though now better insulated, was still as frigid as river ice. He persistently checked her heartbeat, still present but faint, too faint. With each passing minute, fear burrowed deeper into his chest. He positioned her nearer to the fire, gently rotating her in his arms, attempting to warm each side, but nothing changed, no twitch, no whimper, only the stillness of a body perilously close to its limit. Outside, the storm raged with increased ferocity, rattling the fragile framework of the cabin. The roof groaned beneath the burden of snow, and Ethan glanced upwards, apprehensive. A collapse now would trap them both, if not worse. He tried the radio again, static, still nothing. He cursed under his breath, then quickly corrected himself. No negativity, not now. But the fear was encroaching, that same helpless fear he had experienced as a child, staring at Marley's frozen form. His breath caught in his throat, he couldn't endure that again. Sasha emitted a sound, not a bark, not a whine, but something between a gasp and a breath. It was so faint he almost missed it. He looked down, her mouth had parted slightly, and one paw moved. It was something, not enough, but something. Then her body convulsed. Ethan jumped instinctively, holding her tighter. She trembled violently as if her muscles were firing all at once. He knew this could be good or very, very bad. In hypothermic cases, shivering returning could mean the body was fighting, or it could mean it was giving out. The line between recovery and death was paper thin. "Come on, girl," he whispered, brushing her damp ear. "Don't do this to me." She stopped moving again, her breathing back to shallow, her eyelids fluttering weakly. Ethan stared into the fire, trying to think. Then, from the shadows, the memory of a survival article he'd read flashed into his mind. Keep the core warm, not the limbs. You warm the outside too fast and the blood rush can shut the heart down. He pulled off his thermal undershirt, wrapping it tightly around her middle. He sat with her back pressed to his chest, keeping her head elevated. He whispered soothing nonsense, anything to keep himself from falling into the spiral of doubt. But he could feel her slipping, he knew the signs. This wasn't like an injured dog, this was a dying puppy pulled from a grave of snow, now stuck in a frozen purgatory between life and death. His fingers trembled as he reached for his pack. Inside was a thermal gel pouch he'd forgotten, one last resort. He cracked it, shaking it hard, then slid it under her blanket cocoon. If this didn't help, he didn't know what else he could give. The fire crackled louder, shadows danced, the roof groaned again. And then, just as he leaned back in exhaustion, Sasha's tiny paw pushed out from the blanket, resting gently against his arm. It didn't stay long, but it stayed long enough. Camilla's boots sank deeper into the snow with each stride, the glimmer of firelight she had previously observed now obscured by a veil of wind and whiteness. Her muscles protested with every movement, and the frigid air pierced her lungs like tiny daggers, yet she refused to decelerate. Somewhere ahead, Ethan was contending with the impossible, attempting to sustain a frozen puppy amidst the most severe storm Timbavale had witnessed in a decade. And she knew if he had ignited a fire in a derelict outpost, the chances were heavily against him that fire would not endure indefinitely. Then, through a curve in the snow-laden trail, she perceived smoke, dense and coiling skyward like an inquiry. Her heart leaped, but before she could advance further, a loud, metallic snap resonated through the forest behind her. She pivoted, her eyes wide. From behind a curtain of snow-draped trees, an old snowplow truck rumbled into view, its lights flickering through the haze. Initially, she froze. No one was supposed to be out here. Then the door opened and a man emerged, bearded, stooped, clad in a coat mended with various fabrics and fur. "Fletcher." Camilla's voice cracked. Old man Fletcher grunted in acknowledgement. "Saw smoke. Figured someone was daft enough to be out here." Of all individuals to appear, she had not anticipated him. Known in town as a recluse, Fletcher had not communicated with most people in years, yet he was also a former wildlife tracker. If anyone could navigate the storm, it was he. "I need assistance," she stated. "Ethan is stranded at the old ranger outpost with a dying pup." Fletcher's eyes narrowed. He looked past her at the trail she had forged. "You won't manage alone, not in this tempest. I'm not abandoning him out there." He did not contend. Instead, he turned back to his truck and gestured for her to enter. "Grab the flare. We'll ignite it if we locate him." The cab smelled of aged pine and gasoline, the windshield was cracked, but the engine roared to life, and Camilla felt the initial flicker of hope resurge within her. The vehicle groaned as it pushed through the drifts, every overhead branch appeared on the verge of snapping under the weight. The silence between them was not uncomfortable, it was focused, two individuals with a singular objective. Minutes later, Fletcher pointed. "There." Camilla's breath caught. The outpost, barely discernible, tilted under the snow, smoke escaping from the stovepipe in slow, uneven trails. "Go," Fletcher instructed. "I'll keep the truck warm." She leaped out before he could finish. The snow was now waist-deep. She trudged the final few feet, her heart pounding, praying she wasn't too late. As her hand reached the door, the wind carried a single sound from inside, a weak bark. She didn't wait. She pushed the door open, and everything that happened next would change all three lives forever. The door burst open with a blast of wind, snow cascading in behind Camilla like a sentient entity. Her gaze swept across the room, immediately fixating on the flickering firelight and the figure huddled beside it. Ethan was barely conscious, his back against the wall, his face pallid and drenched in perspiration. In his arms, enveloped in layers of improvised blankets, was the puppy, still silent and alarmingly small. "Ethan." Camilla hurried to him, dropping to her knees. He blinked slowly, as if recognizing her required effort. "Cam, you found us," he murmured, his voice hoarse and barely audible. She's holding on, but I don't know for how much longer." Camilla's attention shifted to the puppy. Sasha's body was warm, but insufficiently so. Her breathing was present, but too slow, too delicate. The thermal pouch Ethan had employed had lost its heat. She gently drew back a layer of blanket and observed the indications of severe frostbite on the pup's hind leg. Her heart sank, the damage was already advancing. "We don't have time," she whispered, fumbling in her kit. She had brought everything she could transport, emergency 4-packs, warming wraps, even a portable thermal stimulator borrowed from the ranger clinic. She applied the wrap carefully to Sasha's abdomen, working swiftly but cautiously. Ethan attempted to sit up straighter, but he was shivering violently now. The warmth he had used to protect Sasha had depleted him as well. "Don't worry about me," he said, his teeth chattering. Just get her stable." "You're both getting out of here," she retorted. "We didn't come all this way for a miracle just to lose it now." Outside, the wind emitted a sudden shriek. The old outpost groaned above them, A loud crack followed, then a slow, grinding creak that made Camilla's stomach twist. She looked up just in time to see a corner beam shift under the weight of snow. The roof, she muttered, already pulling the puppy and Ethan away from the edge of the room. Another crack, then a section of the roof gave way. Snow poured in like a waterfall, dousing the edge of the fire. Sparks hissed and vanished in the freezing air. The heat source gone, the room dropped in temperature instantly and the last bit of warmth clung to the embers still glowing in the metal stove. Camilla's mind raced. They couldn't stay, not even for another hour. Fletcher was waiting outside in the truck, but the path back was steep and worsening by the minute. She looked at Ethan. "Can you walk?" He nodded weakly, already trying to pull himself up, using the wall for balance. Camilla secured Sasha tightly inside her thermal pack, cradling her as if she were made of glass. "We move now," she said. "This place isn't going to hold." Together, they stepped outside into the maw of the storm. But what none of them knew was that the worst wasn't over. Not yet. A wall of snow was sliding off the nearby slope, silent but deadly, and its path was pointed straight at the narrow trail ahead. And they were walking right into it. The snow struck Camilla's body like a wall of ice, nearly toppling her backward as she pulled Ethan along the constricting trail, Sasha secured tightly within her coat. She clutched the thermal pack as if it held her own heartbeat. The world was a maelstrom of white and howling wind, slicing across her cheeks, snow swirling in every direction, no horizon visible. Only the faint path behind them and the heavy thrum of Fletcher's snowplow idling somewhere ahead provided any sense of orientation. But then the sound shifted, a distant, hollow roar, not thunder, not wind. Camilla froze, her instincts on high alert. She turned her head and saw it, a mass of snow, like a living entity, tumbling silently down from the ridge above, gathering speed with terrifying momentum. An avalanche not colossal, but potent enough to bury them in seconds if they didn't move immediately. "Move," she screamed, yanking Ethan with all her might. He staggered but complied, his legs unsteady, every step a struggle. The trail was treacherous and narrow, clinging to the slope below which a steep drop vanished into a frozen chasm. One misstep. Snow exploded behind them as the avalanche's edge swept across the upper trail. Camilla didn't look back, she didn't dare. Every breath burned her lungs, but her legs didn't falter. Neither did Ethan's. Somehow, through pure instinct and sheer panic, they reached a bend in the trail where Fletcher's truck was just visible through the whiteout. "Fletcher," she shouted. The truck door flew open. Fletcher, rifle slung over his back, waded into the storm, his feet steady as roots. "Get in, now." Camilla shoved Ethan forward, he collapsed into the passenger side. She followed, curling protectively around Sasha as she slammed the door shut. A second later, the avalanche swept the trail behind them, erasing everything: footprints, trees, any evidence they'd even been there. They sat in stunned silence, the only sounds their gasps for air and Sasha's faint breathing. Fletcher broke it first. "She's still breathing?" Camilla nodded, barely able to speak. But not for long. Without hesitation, Fletcher threw the truck into gear. "Hang on. We're going downhill fast." The plow barreled through the drifts, tires fighting for grip as they descended. Ethan leaned his head against the window, his eyes fluttering closed. Camilla adjusted Sasha's wrap, checking the puppy's breath still there, but slowing. The outpost was gone, the fire extinguished, the trail behind them buried in a deadly slide. But they were moving, and somewhere ahead warmth awaited. Still, the question remained, would it be soon enough? Because Sasha's body had started to grow eerily still in her arms. The wheels gripped the icy incline with a jarring tenacity, Fletcher's weathered hands clutching the steering wheel as if it were the sole anchor for them all. Camilla leaned against the side door, Sasha nestled against her chest, motionless save for the barely discernible rhythm of her breath. Each beat, or skipped beat, caused her heart to lurch. The thermal wrap was no longer retaining heat, the puppy was growing cold again. The storm outside showed no signs of abating, trees swayed violently, the wind howling as if mourning something not yet lost. Ethan stirred in the front seat, his teeth chattering. How long?" he managed to ask. 10 more miles, Fletcher growled, his eyes fixed on the narrow path ahead. "That's if the mountain doesn't throw another tantrum." They passed a fallen tree trunk Fletcher had cleared days prior, the only reason this shortcut was even viable. But now, snow was reclaiming the trail faster than they could traverse it. The truck shuddered as they hit a frozen depression, and Sasha emitted a tiny, raspy cry in Camilla's arms, weak, barely a whisper of sound, but it pierced her more profoundly than any scream could have. She pressed her lips to the top of the puppy's head, whispering, "Hold on, baby. You didn't fight this hard to give up now." The tears she had suppressed since finding Ethan began to escape, but she blinked them away, she needed to focus. If her hands trembled, if she allowed panic to rise, she would lose the fragile equilibrium they had maintained for so long. Then a groan, a metallic whine, the truck jolted to a halt. Fletcher cursed, slamming the gearshift back and forth. Nothing. What's happening? Camila snapped. Axle. Frozen, he muttered. We bottomed out? Snowdrift's too deep. For a second, the three of them just sat there, suspended in stunned silence. Then Camila unbuckled her belt. We walk. No. Fletcher barked. It's too far. It's suicide. Camila opened the door anyway. She'll die in this truck if we wait. Her organs will shut down. I'm not watching that happen. Ethan reached out, weak but determined. I can walk. I'll try. Fletcher looked between them, torn between reason and something he rarely allowed to surface, hope. With a heavy sigh, he grabbed his pack from behind the seat. We stick to the frozen riverbed. It's flatter, faster. But if that ice breaks... It won't, Camila cut in, already wrapping another layer around Sasha, her face having lost color. Time wasn't just slipping away, it was sprinting. They stepped out into the storm together, Camila in the lead, Fletcher breaking trail with a hand axe, Ethan staggering behind. Each step was a battle, but every crunch of snow beneath their boots was a defiance, the kind that said, we're not done yet. The ranger clinic was still miles ahead, but the miracle had already started the moment they refused to give up. Now, the question wasn't just whether Sasha would survive the cold, but whether they all would. The illumination from the ranger station pierced the tempest like a beacon in a sea of white. Camila was the first to perceive them, small, distant, obscured by snow, yet unmistakable. Her legs nearly gave way from the overwhelming sense of relief. Fletcher was behind her, supporting Ethan's arm over his shoulder, both men leaning into the wind as if it were a physical barrier they had to overcome. The final half-mile had been arduous, uneven ice, sharp gusts, and terrain that seemed interminable. But now, they were close enough to believe in rescue once more. Camila did not pause, she surged forward, her heart thudding as she pressed Sasha tighter to her chest. The puppy had not emitted a sound for 20 minutes, no whimper, no twitch, not even a breath she could discern. Yet, she could not accept what that implied, not yet. Her mind replayed a single thought, if we get there, she still has a chance. The ranger on duty was already outside when she reached the entrance, alerted by Fletcher's emergency flare, ignited 20 minutes earlier. His eyes widened when he saw the bundle in her arms. No words were exchanged, only swift action. He held the door open as Camila burst in, followed moments later by Fletcher and Ethan, who collapsed onto a bench just inside. A portable heating unit was already roaring to life in the corner. Camila laid Sasha on the table near it, unwrapping her gently. The sight stole her breath. Sasha's tiny frame was stiff, her fur still frozen at the tips, her legs motionless. For one awful second, it looked like they were too late. Get Dr. Alden. Camila barked at the ranger. Now. On the way, he answered, grabbing the radio. Camila began working automatically. She slipped a warming pad beneath Sasha's chest and rubbed her ribs in slow, circular motions. Come on, baby. Come back to me, she whispered, her voice cracking. You're not done yet. You didn't survive all that just to stop now. Fletcher stepped closer, his face grave. I've seen pups like her, frozen stiff. Ain't seen one come back from it. Camila didn't even look at him. Then this will be the first. Time crawled, 5 minutes, then 10. The wind howled against the walls. Ethan, pale and dizzy, reached out a hand. Is she? Before he could finish, a small, ragged breath escaped from Sasha's mouth. Camila froze. Everyone did. The puppy's chest rose again, barely, but undeniably. Her lips twitched, a shudder passed through her body, and her paw jerked once, as if reaching for something in a dream. Camila's knees gave way. She clutched the edge of the table, sobbing in disbelief. She's fighting, she whispered. She's still fighting. The ranger looked at the door. Dr. Alden's pulling in now. If anyone can save her, it's her. And for the first time in nearly 3 days, Camila let herself believe. This puppy, this frozen miracle, might actually live. Dr. Moira Alden entered the ranger station, her breath misting her spectacles, an air of urgency emanating from her every gesture. She required no explanation. A single glance at the table, at Sasha's motionless, curled form, conveyed everything. She set her medical case down with a decisive thud and immediately commenced her work. The room seemed to descend into a profound quietude, thick with a mixture of fear and hope. suspended in equal measure. With deft fingers, she inserted a warming fore into Sasha's front leg. The solution was already heated, specifically designed for frostbite cases in wildlife rescues. Camila hovered nearby, her hands clenched, observing the monitor as Dr. Alden attached sensors to Sasha's chest. The small screen flickered to life, then stabilized, displaying a faint but present heartbeat. Too slow, too soft, but not absent. "She's hanging by a thread," Dr. Alden stated, her voice calm yet laden with gravity. "Her organs are chilled. We need to raise her temperature steadily, not too fast, or her body could shut down." Ethan, now enveloped in blankets and sipping hot tea, looked up from across the room. "What are her chances?" Dr. Alden did not respond immediately. She focused on adjusting the puppy's oxygen mask and repositioning the heat wraps around her core. Then she looked at them both and said, "We're past the point where numbers matter. This is the part where willpower takes over." Camila moved closer and gently brushed Sasha's frostbitten ear with her finger. "You hear that, baby? This one's on you now." Time passed in strange waves. The storm outside had softened to a steady snowfall, but inside the ranger station, everything was still, the kind of stillness that feels holy. Sasha's heartbeat monitor gave off a steady beep every few seconds, and each sound was a victory. But then, another drop. The beeps spaced out farther. Her temperature plateaued. Her breathing grew shallower again. Dr. Alden's jaw tightened. "She's crashing." Camila stepped back as Dr. Alden reached into her kit and pulled out a syringe. "I'm giving her a mild cardiac stimulant. It's risky, but if we don't jolt her back now." No one needed her to finish the sentence. The needle slid in. Sasha's body gave the faintest twitch. 1 second, 2. The monitor flatlined. "No," Camila whispered. "No, no, no, please." Dr. Alden didn't flinch. She pressed her fingers to Sasha's tiny chest and began massaging in firm, rhythmic compressions. 1, 2, 3. Time blurred. Then 1 beep. Then 2. The monitor jumped back to life. Camila collapsed into a chair, burying her face in her hands. Fletcher stood silent in the corner, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Even Ethan let out a shaky breath, as if he hadn't exhaled in minutes. The warmth slowly returned to Sasha's skin. Her heartbeat steadied. Her breaths, though weak, were consistent. She hadn't won yet, but she wasn't losing either. Dr. Alden adjusted the foreflow and gave a nod. "She's back in the fight." Camila couldn't speak. She just sat there, eyes locked on the tiny fighter lying beneath the tangle of wires and blankets, and whispered, "Don't stop now, girl. You've already come too far." And Sasha, though silent and still, stayed. Morning arrived unhurriedly over Timbavale, the tempest having subsided like a creature finally exhausted. The world beyond the ranger station lay draped in a tranquil, glistening blanket of snow, untouched and luminous under the pale dawn. Within, a different illumination pervaded the room, one originating not from fire or electricity, but from relief, incredulity, and an emotion that could only be described as wonder. Sasha was alive, not merely enduring, but breathing, blinking feebly, adjusting herself beneath her covering. Her form, still enveloped in warmed fabric and medical tubing, had regained a steady hue. The frostbite on her leg was severe and would necessitate care, but the remainder, her heart, lungs, and consciousness, had emerged unscathed. It was not merely probable, it was, as Dr. Alden remarked while re-examining her vital signs, a miracle that science will never fully explain. Camila sat beside her, a hand resting lightly on the pup's chest, sensing every rise and fall with a reverence typically reserved for sacred objects. Her eyes were swollen from tears and lack of sleep, her voice nearly gone, but her spirit was resolute. She had not departed from Sasha's side for an instant. Ethan, propped up with a blanket across his lap and a bandage around his bruised shoulder, observed quietly. He had spoken little since Sasha stabilized, merely gazing at her repeatedly as if unable to believe she was real, that she had survived, that they had all survived. Fletcher stood in the doorway, sipping acrid coffee from a chipped mug, the corner of his mouth twitching into what might have been a smile. "She's a resilient little thing," he mumbled. "Going to make it." Dr. Alden completed her final assessment and stepped back. "She'll require rehabilitation, a great deal of it, nutrition, hydrotherapy, pain management for the leg. But there's no indication of neurological impairment. Whatever fight she possessed, it was stronger than anything I've witnessed in years. Camila leaned in and whispered, "You hear that, Sasha? You beat it. You really beat it." And for the first time since being discovered buried in that blizzard, Sasha looked up at her, not blankly, not fearfully, but with recognition. She blinked slowly, then let out a soft, hoarse whine. Not pain, not confusion. Trust. Later that day, when the roads cleared and reporters came calling, no one quite knew how to explain what had happened. The vet called it a defiance of physiological limits, the local paper called it the puppy who froze time. But the story spread quickly, about the man who wouldn't give up, the woman who braved the storm, the old tracker who returned to the world for one last good deed, and the pup who lived through what no one thought she could. Ethan didn't give her up. He filed the adoption papers within the week, naming her exactly what he'd been calling her since that first night, Sasha. It meant defender, survivor, a name that had earned its place more than once. A month later, she limped across the floor of his apartment, a little unsteady but full of energy, carrying a stuffed fox in her mouth and barking at the television. And Ethan, sitting cross-legged on the floor beside her, laughed harder than he had in years. Because in a world that too often gave up too easily, one little heartbeat had refused to stop. And now it never would.